This just gives you a visual of where our school zones are. And there were some questions earlier in the day about how do you come up with this placement? Why do you put the signs here as opposed to there? And there is a national standard that is in place, and it has some acronym, and my engineer friends would be more familiar with it than I usually am, but I do have it in here. So, yeah, that thing. Yeah. And they say the national standard is about 200 feet from an object, which is normally a crosswalk or a playground or something like that. And as you can see, Rushton Elementary is here, and it's really, the perimeter around that is pretty well covered to accommodate the passing times. The ordinance that will be before you, where we want to modify that, does a couple of things. One, it takes away the school zones around the church, which no longer has a school in it. That's a no-brainer. The second one, though, is it modifies only by about 10 minutes, but the times for the enforcement of those school zones. Our thought process was we wanted to use about 45 minutes to let kids get there, and then 15 for people who were kind of like me, running late most of the time, and we got there. And then we flipped that around in the afternoons, about 15 minutes beforehand, but I know I got a paddling once for hanging around school after I was told to go home. 6th grade, I recovered. But, so we reversed that. And that's what you have before you, and really, that's about it.
As it relates to 63rd and Row, we've got Prairie Village and Fairway also involved.
Well, Prairie Village is down here.
Right.
They really aren't involved in the enforcement of this, and yes, we're coordinating that change in time with Fairway, of course. I've got their number.
What is the cost on
Still
signage?
returning calls?
The signage, we already own the signs, so it's just a matter of changing the times, and I believe that cost will be nominal. We have the equipment, the people, and the ability to do that.
And then how are we going to convey this to the public other than just posting new signs?
The signs will be up. We'll go through an education process, as we always do in the enforcement mode. Whenever we change anything, we don't just start going right into an enforcement. We'll stop people and bring it to their attention. We'll also coordinate with the schools. They obviously communicate with parents prior to the start of schools. We'll make sure that there's something that goes out to the parents so they're aware of it as well. Generally, it's not the parents that are doing that. It's the people who are, whatever reason, running late for school, running late for here, and they're the ones that are the biggest violators of our school zones, which are also the ones that endanger our children.
Now, do we have like double fines in school zones?
Yes, ma'am. Somebody suggested we just designate the whole city as a school zone 24 hours a day. Probably a little over the top.
It is a place of learning.
It's a technique, isn't it, though?
It's all on how you define it, right? Other questions for Chief?
It's not a big issue for me, but it would make sense for 52nd Street to connect to the green and yellow zones. I don't know how difficult that would be to change. You have a block on either side of 52nd Street where you don't, I mean, realistically.
Over here?
No, where the red, yeah, there's a block there,
This little section right here,
and then on the other side.
and then this piece that goes
Yes,
up.
it would make sense if those connected. I don't know if that's a big deal, but
I'll check with the traffic guys and see if that has
I'm
ever.
not asking for a lot of
been-
money to
Sure.
move signs or anything,
Right.
but, you know, it just would make sense.
I'll ask him if that's an area that's been an area of concern.
Practically, you can't speed in one block and then slow down the next. But
Well, it's not for tonight's discussion. That's why I don't support things like speed humps, because people actually do speed up between them to make up for lost time slowing down to go over the hump. So, yeah, be glad to ask that.
And I don't think you enforce on either one of those blocks anyway, so.
Other questions? Is there a recommendation?
Take it to council.
I agree.
Everybody on the
Consent.
Consent, okay.
I'm sitting in for John.
John can make some decisions tonight, okay?
Boy,
That's good.
John's positive.
Okay, Chief is up with the second, another item, the ordinance adopting 2011 standard traffic ordinance in uniform public.
This is a standard every year event. Nothing surprising here. This year has been a little bit unique, though. Usually I have the books in front of me, and I'm able to dispense those to you. These are still at the printers. We'll have them before the council meeting next week. The reason why there is some sense of urgency particularly relates to the DUI law that recently was enacted by the Kent State Legislature. It placed some specific requirements on cities to make sure that we identify maximum and minimum fines that can be brought against people who are found offending our DUI laws. Most city ordinances adopt the standard traffic ordinance, and the last year's STO didn't include that specificity. So unless it was already in your municipal ordinance, which it is not in ours, we have, since the 1st of July, a requirement to not prosecute any DUIs in our own municipal court. We're having to send them up to district court. District court, because they can enforce the state statute. For us to enforce it at the municipal level, it has to be adopted by the governing body of our municipality, you folks. So, yeah, I agree. Bottom line is, we need to get the STO and the UPOC adopted. We will have these things in hand and in your hands prior to the council meeting. Our intent this evening was to come before you, make sure we've got a placeholder, get it on the agenda, and it will be this, as you have done for the last however many years you've been on the council. We need to adopt these things so that we're all abiding by the same rules, enforcing the same rules. There's no confusion when you cross city lines as to what do you do at stop signs and what do you do with weapons and that sort of thing.
And then, so once this is adopted, then our municipal court will have the ability to
As soon as it's published.
publish. Got it, okay.
I so recommend.
Does it have to be published twice? Just once?
I so
Recommended
recommend.
by Sue, John,
Mm-hmm.
John?
Consent.
Debbie. Debbie and John, I like it, thank you.
There weren't any changes.
You know, we adopt the significant changes that are enacted by the state, and the biggest one is the DUI, but there were
Yeah.
some other items that seatbelt, it's $10 now, it was $5, it used to be whatever the municipality wanted. It's those kinds of things that brings us in line with state statute.
But we're not changing any of our speed limits
No, sir.
from 1 to something different.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yes, everything's going to 34 miles an hour.
Yeah, 34.
All right, thank you.